Who is the Queen of Heaven? God deserves to be worshipped. He alone deserves to be adored. He alone deserves to be admired because of who He is, the great God. Within the Bible, we see a problem that occurs time and time again. And this problem is still happening today. And this problem is the problem of idolatry. The very core of idolatry is evil. It attempts to usurp worship and adoration from the one true God into other things. And fundamentally, this is an area of contention. Satan wants to be worshipped. When he came to tempt Jesus, he came and wanted to be worshipped. Luke chapter 4, verses 5 through 8. And the devil, taking him up into a high mountain, shewed unto him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said unto him, All this power will I give thee, and the glory of them, for that is delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will, I give it. If thou therefore wilt worship me, all shall be thine. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Get thee behind me, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. When the mark of the beast will be introduced, it will be an issue of worship, an issue of idolatry. Revelation chapter 13, verses 15 through 17. And he had the power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. In the end times, the mark of the beast will be a literal mark that people will put on their foreheads and right hands, which will signify who they worship. And what does worship come back to? Worship comes back to the issue of idolatry. Idolatry is the worship of someone or something other than God, as though it were God. Exodus chapter 20, verse 3, Thou shalt have no other gods before me. There was a form of idolatry which the children of Israel were involved in the days of Jeremiah the prophet, and this same idolatry is still happening today. The only difference is that it has taken up different forms, and that is the worship of, quote, the Queen of Heaven, which is a title for Ishtar, or Akkadian, also called Ashtoreth or Astarte. In their system of gods and goddesses, Ishtar was believed to be the wife of the false god called Baal or Molech. As the wife of the chief male deity in these pagan worshipping cultures, Ishtar became known by the name Queen of Heaven. She was and is known as the goddess of love and fertility. Now, what a lot of people do not realize is that the term, quote, the Queen of Heaven, can also be found in the Bible. The title, quote, the Queen of Heaven, is referred to in two passages in the Bible, both in the book of Jeremiah. The Queen of Heaven was the Babylonian Ishtar, the mother goddess, the mother of God. There are a range of different religions and beliefs who refer to Ishtar as the mother of God. Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 18. The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead their dough to make cakes to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto other gods, that they may provoke me to anger. In Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 18, the prophets recounted the abominable practices which the Israelites did to provoke God to anger. The children gathered woods, the fathers ignited the fire, while the women kneaded their dough to bake cakes to what they eulogize as the Queen of Heaven. As such, the children of Israel and their entire families engaged in division of labor to prosper idolatry in the land. The Queen of Heaven was also thought to be the wife of Baal, which is also called Molech, a god which Jezebel, the wife of King Ahab, was presumed to have introduced to the Israelites. The word cakes in Jeremiah chapter 7 verse 18 is kawanim, meaning a preferred sacrificial wafer. That word is of foreign origin, occurring again only in Jeremiah chapter 44 verse 19, where the same cult is described. Quote, "A female deity is foreign to Old Testament theology, so the implication is that this cult was of non-Hebraic origin." End quote, Harrison. One of the motivations for the worship of Ashtaroth is that she was believed to be responsible for fertility in women. And because children were greatly desired by women in those days, this foreign worship was imbibed by the Israelites despite all the warnings of God to them against idolatry. God detests sin, but one of the sins that almost immediately incurs the wrath of God is idolatry. God destroyed foreign nations and gave their lands to the Israelites because of their idolatrous practices. Yet, the Israelites took over those abominable practices and provoked God to anger. The second passage where the Queen of Heaven is directly mentioned is Jeremiah chapter 44, verses 17 through 25, where the Israelites refuse the word of the Lord through prophet Jeremiah and proclaim their loyalty to the Queen of Heaven. Jeremiah chapter 44, verses 16 through 19 reads, "As for the word that you have spoken to us in the name of the Lord, we will not listen to you, but we will certainly do whatever has gone out of our own mouth, to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven and pour out drink offerings to her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings and our princes, in the city of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of food, were well off, and saw no trouble. But since we stopped burning incense to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have lacked everything, and have been consumed by the sword and by famine." The women also said, "And when we burned incense to the Queen of Heaven and poured out drink offerings to her, did we make cakes for her, to worship her, and pour out drink offerings to her without our husband's permission?" This was the response of the Israelites to Jeremiah when he brought them the word of the Lord against their idolatrous practices. The Israelites were so obstinate to God's warnings, they were not only proclaiming their allegiance to Ashtaroth, the Queen of Heaven, they also ascribed the peace and prosperity which they received from God to her. The Wiersbe Commentary Bible states, "The men and women listening to Jeremiah tried to defend their sins by appealing to experience. They used the pragmatic argument, quote, 'If it works, it must be right.' When they lived in Judah and secretly worshipped the Queen of Heaven, the goddess of fertility, everything went well with them. They had plenty of food and enjoyed comfortable circumstances. But when King Josiah made people give up their idols, things began to get worse for them. Conclusion? They were better off when they disobeyed God and worshipped idols." I want you to notice that although they were involved in evil idolatry practice, things seemingly went well for them. Demons can make you feel real good. So often, we associate evil spirits with demonic possession or torment. But that is not always the case. Evil spirits are deceiving spirits, and they can make you feel really good. This is why I do not doubt that people involved in evil and satanic things do experience positive things, just like the children of Israel prospered under the worship of the Queen of Heaven. There are people who today are being deceived by spirits because seemingly once they got involved in these evil practices, their lives got better. These people won't be lying. Their lives genuinely would have improved, but it is a deception. Allow me to give you a modern example, which is sweeping across our world today: specific forms of meditation. There are some forms of meditation that are out there which are embedded in strange religions, and its roots are embedded in snakes. And people who meditate use strange techniques and practices, channeling spirits they have no idea even exist. And when they speak about it, they talk about how their lives have improved, how they cope better with stress and anxiety, and so on. And I do not doubt that these people are telling the truth about the improvements that they've experienced. But what is the source of these improvements? Just like people in the day of Jeremiah used pragmatic arguments, quote, "If it works, it must be right." People are doing that today. Just because something works does not mean it is right. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. I read Luke chapter 4, verses 5 through 8 at the start of the sermon, and I want you to notice that Satan showed Jesus all the kingdoms of this world, and he offered to give Jesus all the kingdoms of the world. Satan would not be able to offer these kingdoms if they were not in his possession to give. Satan has power. The dark side has power. And just because something works does not mean God condones it. God does not tolerate idolatry. And just like the people in the day of Jeremiah were involved with idolatry with the Queen of Heaven, people are involved in idolatry today. These people viewed the Queen of Heaven in a positive light because they were receiving positive results. But the truth is, you can receive positive results doing evil for a season. But ultimately, you will have to answer to God. Live according to God's law. Live according to what God condones. Unfortunately, there are Christians who stray into practices that are evil in the eyes of the Lord and stay in those practices because they are receiving positive results. But one day, you will have to answer to the living God. Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations there. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. You must be blameless before the Lord your God.